Welcome to Let's Talk Criterion, and we enter the spooky month of October leading up to Halloween, and we have our first sinister offering. Two films, I Walked with a Zombie and The Seventh Victim, both joining the collection in 4K UHD. Val Lewton was born in 1904 and was a Ukrainian-American novelist, film producer and screenwriter, best known for a string of low-budget horror films he produced for RKO Pictures in the 1940s. His son, also named Val, was a painter and exhibition designer. Now, Lewton was born in Yalta, Imperial Russia, and emigrated to the United States with his family in 1909. He began his career as a writer and produced novels, including the best-selling pulp novel No Bed of Her Own. Lewton worked also as a writer and publicist for MGM before being named the head of RKO's horror unit in 1942. His first production, the well-known Cat People, became a top moneymaker for RKO in that year, and he also produced several successful films, often writing the final drafts of the screenplays himself. He gave first directing opportunities to Robert Wise, Mark Robson, and of course he worked with Boris Karloff, who credited Lewton with saving his career. After leaving RKO, Lewton worked for Paramount Pictures and MGM, and he produced various films for them. His life and work have inspired books, a documentary, and a feature film about his life. But it's during the 1940s that he made his most prolific films, including working with director Jacques Tourneur on Cat People, a modest production from 1942 about a Serbian woman in New York who fears that she will turn into a giant cat if her emotions are aroused. Now, rather than showing any such transformation, Cat People relied on suggestive shadows and sound to create a sense of unspeakable horror about to descend on its characters. It was one of the year's surprise hits, and it came to be recognised, of course, in time as a horror classic. Now, I particularly mention Cat People as it's already part of the Criterion collection as Spine 833. The success of Cat People enabled Lewton to make his next films with relatively little studio interference, allowing him to fulfill his vision despite the sensationalistic film titles he was given and focusing on ominous suggestion and themes of existential ambivalence. Now, despite the lurid title, the macabre I Walked with a Zombie from 1943 was an atmospheric and haunting drama, and it loosely was updating Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre into a modern-day Caribbean island setting. It stars James Ellison, Francis Dee and Tom Conway, and it follows a Canadian nurse who travels to care for the ailing wife of a sugar plantation owner in the Caribbean, and she witnesses voodoo rituals and possibly encounters the Walking Dead. The screenplay, written by Kurt Siodmak and Ardell Ray, is based on an article of the same title by Inez Wallace and partly reinterprets the narrative of the 1847 novel by Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre. Anytime a horror movie begins with a wistful and reflective voiceover from its female lead, it's a safe bet that trouble's ahead. Now, the woman's a nurse named Betsy Connell, played in the film by Francis Dee. She's been hired by a planter on the island of Saint Sebastian to take care of his infirm wife. Now, Betsy at first is a bit put off by the idea of working in the Caribbean, but she changes her tune completely when she sees her first South Sea sunset. Her employer, Paul Holland, Tom Conway from Cat People and the Atomic Submarine, isn't impressed though, and he does his damnedest to spoil it for her by way of introducing himself. Now, Holland's plantation is a strange place indeed. The various members of the family just don't get along very well together. And for one thing, the bitter legacy of slavery also hangs like a pall of misery over everything on the island, in what I suppose was meant to be an atmospheric manner at the time. Now, Holland's half-brother, that's Wesley Rand, seems to have a particularly strong grudge against Betsy's new employer. And there's all kinds of mysterious hints dropping from the sky whenever he and Betsy are together. But it isn't until Betsy encounters Jessica Holland, played in the film by Christine Gordon, for the first time that she has any real idea of what she's actually gotten herself into. Now, I Walked with a Zombie is a Val Lewton Jacques Tourneur movie. After all, far be it from either of those two guys to give you a straight answer about anything. Now, a lot of people consider I Walked with a Zombie second only to Cat People among RKO's Lewton-produced thrillers from the early 1940s. Now, the main basis for the praise that is heaped upon those films seems to be the poetry, especially in I Walked with a Zombie. It's a juxtaposition, for instance, of family dysfunction and black magic set against the scenic beauty of the idyllic West Indies. This is definitely what you'd call a voodoo movie. Now, I don't expect something, of course, like Dawn of the Dead from an early 40s zombie voodoo flick, but the fact that scattered bits and pieces of I Walked with a Zombie actually do work just makes the parts that don't work that much more frustrating. I Walked with a Zombie had its theatrical premiere on April the 8th, in 1943 in Cleveland, Ohio, and that was the hometown of Inez Wallace, the author of the film's source material. The film itself opened in New York City on April the 21st, before it expanded wide across the country on April the 3rd. Anna Lee was originally slated for the role, ultimately played by Frances Dee, but she unfortunately had to bow out due to another commitment she had at the time. Now, Dee received $6,000 for her performance in the film. Initial reception for the film was mixed by critics, of course. While the New York Times was critical indeed, they called it a dull, disgusting exaggeration of an unhealthy, abnormal concept of life. Wanda Hale, however, of the New York Daily News awarded it 2.5 out of 3 stars, and she praised it as a spine-chilling horror film. Whereas the Boston Globe felt the film gets nowhere in the telling and finishes its overdone melodramatics with an almost unconvincing climax. Now, of course, by today's modern horror standards, this film falls well below the bar. No jump scares. General gore, of course, absent completely, but that's not really what you're after watching, or indeed you expect from a film of this type, considering when it was made. The fact that it explored voodoo at the time is brave enough in itself, as it was considered macabre and very much a non-mainstream subject for film because of its exotic nature. Now, the film approaches the beliefs that are associated with African diaspora religions, particularly Haitian voodoo, and it's in a more thoughtful manner than earlier films that were made, like White Zombie from 1932. I Walked with a Zombie comes to the Criterion collection in a 1:37:1 aspect ratio and a very short running time of just 63 minutes. And the otherworldly atmosphere of this bold reimagining of Jane Eyre is as close as studio-era Hollywood ever came to pure dream state surrealism. Now we move on to the second film in this set, and it's entitled The Seventh Victim, also from 1943. The Seventh Victim is directed by Mark Robson, but still produced by Val Lewton, which, to be fair, is the main focus of this set. It starred Tom Conway, Jean Brooks, Isabel Jewell and Kim Hunter, and it was written for the screen by Charles O'Neill and DeWitt Bowden, and of course produced, as I said, by Val Lewton for RKO Pictures. Now, O'Neill first penned the script as a murder mystery, and it was set in California, and it followed a woman who was hunted by a serial killer. Now, he revised the script loosely based on a Satanic Society meeting that he attended in New York City, and setting it somewhat as a prequel to Cat People from the previous year. Filming took place over 24 days in May of 1943 at the RKO Studios in Los Angeles. And following its release on August the 21st, 1943, it was discovered that 4 substantial scenes had been excised from the final cut, including an extended conclusion. And it was also noted by some critics at the time that the film had homoerotic overtones. Now, the movie gets off to a fantastic start. Immediately following the opening credits, we are thrust into a compelling mystery. Teenager Mary Gibson, that's future Academy Award winner Kim Hunter, is told that her older sister, that's Jacqueline, has gone missing. Now, this news sends a naive Mary shooting off to the streets of New York City to trace down the whereabouts of her lost sibling. And this is an irresistible premise, because we are given almost no background information whatsoever on these characters, yet we still seem to be drawn into the story. A plucky young girl leaves her modest boarding school to travel to the seedy streets of New York City to investigate the disappearance of her sister. I'm really hooked with this. As the film progresses, Mary meets some of her sister's co-workers and their friends in the city, inching closer and closer to finding out the truth. Now, I just don't want to give too much plot away here, so all I'll say is that the macabre and satanic undertones in the film play a part, and of course, there's the hunt for the mysterious killer. Always a draw. Most controversially, the film resolves with a negative outcome for one of the principal characters, not saying who, contrary to the spirit, if not the letter, of the production code. Now, film historian Steve Haberman, in his audio commentary that he recorded for the 2005 Warner Brothers DVD release of this film, categorised Jacqueline as the film's philosophical centre, and he noted her existential views. His exact words are, "Her life is the very nightmare version of life that Val Lewton portrays in many of his movies. A meaningless existence, trying to find meaning, always failing, and in the end, seeking a sort of peace through death." Now, critics have noted homosexual undercurrents, as I've already said, running through the film. That's particularly in Jacqueline's character and her relationship with Francis, a cult member who is an employee at the company that she formerly owned. The film was featured in Turner Classic Movies Screened Out. Now, this was celebrating gay and lesbian themes in classical Hollywood cinema, and frequently movies of this era can be plodding and slow, but director Mark Robson moves the action and the general proceedings along at quite a brisk pace. He's especially fond of giving us the meat of a scene, and then he just quickly dissolves into the next scene. At one point in the film, he dissolves while Mary is actually fainting, which is a pretty odd and daring choice to make. Now, this directing style certainly keeps you on your toes. There's no time to relax, because at any moment what you're watching may dissolve into something else entirely. The acting in the film, I would say, generally is passable, but it's not outstanding. It gets the job done, nothing less and nothing more. And the same goes for the musical score composed by Roy Webb. Again, it's not particularly a memorable score, but at the same time, it's effective within the film. Now, I'm a little bit touchy, really, about the Seventh Victim's relegation to B-movie status. One can only wonder what small improvements would have been made if the film had had a larger budget. Now, in order for The Seventh Victim to fit onto a double feature bill in theatres at the time, the few scenes that were actually cut from the film before it was released, well, certainly I would like to have heard the philosophical discussion that would have took place with Judd, that's the cult member, that ended up on the cutting room floor. And sadly, there were no DVD extras, of course, back in the 1940s, and those scenes, not used in the final print of the movie, well, they ended up being destroyed. So that remains a mystery in itself until this day. Now, the film has, again, a short running time of 71 minutes, and it comes in a 1:37:1 aspect ratio, and both films are presented in 4K UHD with a separate Blu-ray with the films in HD and the following special features. New 4K digital restorations of both films with uncompressed mono soundtracks on the 4K UHD and Blu-ray editions. In the 4K UHD edition, one 4K UHD disc of the films and one Blu-ray with the films and these special features. Audio commentary on I Walked with a Zombie, featuring authors Kim Newman and Stephen Jones. Audio commentary on The Seventh Victim, featuring film historian Steve Haberman. Interview with film historian Imogen Sarah Smith. Audio essays from Adam Roach's podcast, The Secret History of Hollywood, featuring stories about the casts, crews and productions of both films. Shadows in the Dark, The Val Lewton Legacy 2005, a documentary featuring Newman, Val E. Lewton, that's the son of Val Lewton, filmmakers William Friedkin, Guillermo del Toro, George A. Romero, John Landis and Robert Wise, and actor Sarah Karloff, and others. Excerpts from The Origins of the Zombie from Haiti to the US. That's an episode of the PBS series Monstrum, which was hosted by scholar Emily Zarka. There are trailers for the film and an essay written by critics Chris Fujiwara and Lucie Sant. And the illustration for the cover art is by Catherine Lamb. Suffused with ritual, mysticism and the occult, the poetically hypnotic I Walked with a Zombie and the shockingly subversive The Seventh Victim are still tantalizing dreams of death that dare to embrace the darkness. And this releases in the collection in 4K UHD on Tuesday the 8th of October in the US and on Monday the 14th of October here in the UK. In our next edition, we've Japanese new wave renegade Masahiro Shinoda transforming a classic kabuki tale with his own extravagant visual style in a dimension-shattering folk horror fantasia, Demon Pond, coming to the collection on 4K UHD. So until then, from me, it's goodbye, and above all, good Criterion viewing.